Good morning, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many of you here today. I want to welcome you to the first MOLLI webinar of this academic year, 2023-2024. My name is Shinta Hernandez, and I am the new MOLLI director, and I have the pleasure of introducing this webinar to you, and it is called Leading Through Times of Sea Change. And we have a really exciting presentation webinar here for you this morning. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to our moderator, Larry Ragan, who will introduce our panelists to you. Larry.
Terrific. Thanks, Shinta. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. This looks like a great turnout. This is a topic that Doug has talked about for a couple of years as being included in our MOLLI seminars. And we did it in one way or the other. Doug would usually handle this in our MOLLI programs regarding change. But this topic this morning, I'd like to really focus on sort of what I'll refer to as sort of the larger sea changes that we experience. And I have to say, this came to me after a bit of reflection on my own career. So this is a little bit, I don't know if it's a regret or what, I'll just express it though. I wish somebody had sat me down 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and talked to me about how to handle these large scales, not the day-to-day operational changes, but the large scale changes that we would be experiencing throughout our careers. And that's what I'm referring to as a sea change. And that's what we'd like to dig into a little bit and understand what those might be, but not too much to focus on the what, but more about, as a leader, how do I stay attuned to those? How do I manage those? And what strategies can we consider in order to be prepared for when these sea changes come? So that's a setup today. And I'll introduce our speakers in just a minute. So I had to go to Chat GPT, of course, and look up sea change. And it said it's a metaphorical phrase used to describe a profound or significant transformation. And we think about this term, sea change, and we hear it occasionally. That the best example that we can all focus around, or maybe we don't want to focus around it anymore, would be the pandemic. You think about the impact of that very large, in this case, global pandemic that impacted every single aspect of our lives. And we will be living with the repercussions of that for the rest of our lives. Time might be measured from here on in as pre-COVID, post-COVID. That's a big one. And within our institutions, though, we also have other changes, not as dramatic perhaps as the pandemic, but with as much impact on the structure of the organization and the function of our environment, in this case around higher ed. So we wanted to get two panelists who have senior experience within their institutions, who can speak to this idea of, first of all, what sea changes they might have experienced themselves, but also then how they cope with and how they prepare not only themselves, but their team, their staff, for addressing, controlling a bit, I would say, of these sea changes in the future. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Renee Davis, who's an Associate Vice President at the Center for Teaching and Learning at Frederick Community College. I got to get my notes right here. Thank you for being with us today, Renee. And also Dr. Rick Kralevich. Rick is the Vice President for Information and Instructional Technology at Arundel Community College. So thank you both for taking your time out. And I have to say, I always enjoy conversations prepping for these kind of webinars, because you get to explore where people are coming from, understand a little of their background. And these two folks have just been a lot of fun to work with. So Renee, I'm going to start with you, if you wouldn't mind. Tell us a little bit about the sea changes you've experienced, maybe an example or two, if you would. Like, what does that term mean to you?
Indeed, thank you for the question, and thank you for having me for this webinar. I would say here at Frederick Community College, we've experienced some tremendous sea change. And what that means for me in this institution is we have a new president who's been here for about a year. We have a new provost who's been here for about 4 months now, and a bunch of that senior leadership team that's in flux. So maybe one person who's been here over the years. So taking that term to heart, sea change in our institution is ever changing because of the transitions that have happened and the new folks that have come in. And as always, with the installment of a new president, there is also the cultural aspects to it. There are also the mission and vision and the way in which she sees the institution and how we should be operating. And that trickles down to our provost, who is in place and responsible for making sure that our students' needs are met, ensuring that employees' needs are met, and we are just doing things in a manner that is conducive as stakeholders in our ecosystem of community college and community.
Renee, if I could ask you, I mean, administrative changes like that aren't something that happen, hopefully not every year or every other year. Although there have been cases where you've had that kind of turnover. That's got to be really, really tough to get your footing when you have that. What would you say might be a normal cycle of senior leadership change within your institution? Is it like a 5-year or 9-year?
I think it's dependent upon the position. I think historically, if you just look back across the community colleges in Maryland, you have some, for example, let's start with the president's level. You have some that's been in place for a really, really long time. But then, you have, because that was historical, that, presidents, they stay for a bit, right? But I think now, in our modern day presidential culture, that people are moving on in other opportunities to be able to be in other institutions and not really staying in a particular presidential role. So for example, our president came to us from a presidency in Minnesota. So, it's that switch of environments that's happening. And provosts usually, I guess the joke or punchline is a provost isn't with an institution for more than 4 or 5 years. And then there's that, normal transition for them to either want to become a president or do something else in institution. So it's hard to say, just with the way that, community colleges operate and how the folks that are in the seats, their ambitions.
Yeah, but you're certainly hinting to the fact that it's not unexpected. It's not a out of the blue thing. There is sort of a rhythm. You're also suggesting, I think, that the rhythm may be, the pace of it may have increased in the last, say, 10 or 15 years, as you're saying, as people make career changes and moves. So that, those waves are a little bit more, what should I say, present through because people are going to move around and make changes. Interesting. I'm going to come back to you in a bit about the ripple effect of those leadership changes. But let me go to Rick and ask Rick about an example or a thought. When you're looking at this title, what do you think about, Rick?
Yeah, and first, let me just lead off by saying what a pleasure it is for me to be here and speak with you all today. It's exciting, and I mean, Larry's initial comments were correct. It was a really fun prep conversation, and I hope we can do half that well today. So yeah, I mean, I think Renee's points are right dead on. I mean, I heard somebody at a conference not too long ago talk about like what they were calling like the new stability, which in my take was sort of a tongue-in-cheek way of saying that there really isn't the stability that there used to be. But at the same time, they were making a point that maybe that, that those immense long periods of stability that higher ed used to enjoy maybe weren't always as good for us as we think. So maybe maybe change, maybe sea change isn't always a bad thing. And being a part of an organization and being in higher ed now for nearly 25 years myself, first of all, it is, many of you can probably empathize with. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but on the other hand, those last 5 years seem like they've been, throw the playbook out. There's new experiences around every corner, new challenges, new projects, new ways of thinking of things. Um, very positive in some ways, in other ways, man, very negative and very challenging. So how we navigate through this is almost like it's, as I tell my team, it's sort of like we're on an expedition rather than we are on sort of a strategic direction. Trying to figure out how we handle the new stability is really kind of why we're here today, and I think it's the crux of our conversation.
So I'm going to do something that I suggested to Rick or Renee I might do, which is to go off script a little bit, but you're stimulating a thought of if these changes are a little bit more predictable, like you said, Rick, we're not as stable as we used to be, say 20, 25 years ago in higher ed, where you had an administration and they were in place for 10, 15 years, right? It's more constant. What do you do in foreseeing those, in sort of understanding that this is the world you live in, that the ground underneath you is going to shift more frequently? What are some of the things that you two might do in order, and I'm thinking primarily of your perspective. How do you look out, plan, think about the life cycle in today's system?
Yeah, I mean,
Rick, if you don't mind, I'll start with you and then I'll go to Renee.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I don't know that, by the way, I have the right answer to that. I can only tell you kind of what sort of works for me, and although with that being said, I do think that that's I think an important insight for everybody. I think that with the dynamic change that we're all facing, I think it's most important as leaders that we find out what works for us, right? We've got to know who we are. We have got to know what our skills are, the strengths of our team, the strengths of our organizations. Understanding now more so than ever what the mission of a community college is, what the mission of an institution of higher education is, what what our values are, how we want to do business. It's more important that we have those details now than ever. So to answer that question, specifically in my perspective, is I like to double down on the basics, right? The details, right? We have a few guiding principles that we use amongst my team and my organization, and we talk a lot about culture, trust, people, skill, and empathy, right? And as much as we'd like to say that there's some kind of magic bullet to navigating change, it's really the same tried and true methodologies and philosophies that have made us successful, really probably since the dawn of higher ed, is making sure that we've got the right people, the good to great concept, the right people in the right seats on the bus. And I want to make sure that, my team understands that there is a lot of, we talked about signal and noise, and I know we'll talk a little bit about that later, but make sure that my team understands that that we're constantly going to be dealing with something new, a new piece of technology, a new philosophy, a new grant, a new whatever it might be. But as long as we kind of know who we are, what our operational ethos is, how we plan, how we come together, how we focus on people, skill, and trust, and develop a culture around all of that, that gives us the framework by which we make decisions for anything. And I find in most cases, 90% of the cases that works for us. So it's I don't think there's anything new here to sort of how we manage this. I think it's sort of making sure that we understand who we are, doubling down on those philosophies that have got us here in the first place.
Interesting. Renee, do you resound with that? Does that connect to you?
It does. I would also say that the whole creating the right conditions, which is a phrase that our president has coined here, creating the right conditions for our students, creating the right conditions for our employees, creating the right positions that people are in here at the institution, the work that we do. We often talk about the change that happens at the top, but there is still work that's going, and people are doing great jobs of managing this sea change that's happening at that level that you look to for the leadership. But having a culture sometimes shifting with those transitions is a little bit more difficult than we think. And people would prefer oftentimes to continue just doing things the way that they were normally done. And to Mike's point in the chat that I saw pop up, sometimes some changes are long overdue. We can't predict what may happen. Sometimes things are a surprise that such and such is leaving the institution. But then there are those signals that we'll talk about a little bit later that actually give us an inclination of, yeah, there is going to be a change because of the way that the institution is kind of moving in a direction. So taking all of that into account with what Rick says, when you put all of that together with your team, you have to have the empathy, you have to have the open communication, the feedback to them to help them feel safer. Psychological safety is important for folks in institutions when you're experiencing transition, especially for us, so much of it, right? So it's important for your teams, my team, which, I'm fairly new with them, but, working through that process of ensuring that, I'm hearing them and that I am advocating for them and that I'm supporting them, regardless of what may be happening around us at the time. So.
Yeah, I appreciate so much what you're both saying, and I'm taking away. I want to make a sports analogy, I guess. To a team, they will often talk about their core values. Regardless of what's going to happen on the field today, who are we as a team? Because we're either going to win or lose, but we have to remain true to who we are as a unit. And I hear you saying, both of you saying the exact same thing. You need to establish and have established the core values, an understanding of your mission, an understanding of your characteristics in order to weather the other things that are happening around you. Is that, Rick, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's at the same time too, I all of that I agree with, and I think Renee makes some great points. I love, the right conditions concept. That's a great way to sort of describe it. But another part of this too, that I would say is that with the amount of change, not being able to be, to use another sports analogy, maybe, is not be afraid to sort of make a big play, not be afraid to sort of think big, not be afraid of the direction that we're going, because we've talked, organizations and groups like this past, like some leadership groups, kind of want things to stay the same for so long that they'll stick their head in the sand. And, even, we'll talk a little bit later about AI and other innovative technologies and, disruptive technology is probably a better way to describe it. That sort of, that fear of where that goes, just turn the thing off type concept, I don't think really sort of informs us. I think now is a time more so than ever where we have to embrace it, and we got to create those right conditions for people to not be afraid to take that leap off of a pedagogical, an instructional or technological step that they may sort of in the past we might have been afraid to take, and I think that's really kind of a big part of navigating that sea of change.
So Renee, you mentioned you're relatively new in this position, right?
Yes.
Could you remind me, did you say a year or two?
Actually, I was in the interim role for 9 months, so it's really technically a year, but I was officially installed on July 1st. So
okay.
Yeah.
So and we didn't prep for this one, Renee. I'm just going to give you a warning.
Yeah.
What opportunities do you see as a new leader in this position to address that issue of maybe stagnation? Mike Mills brought up, sometimes we need to be shaking things up a little bit. And I'm going back to thinking of some of the focus in higher ed right now is around, diversity, equity, inclusion, openness. We didn't talk like that 15 years ago. Those concepts weren't even about. Now we're talking about them. We're I won't say arguing, but we're discussing them in a really healthy way to figure out, well, how does that change what we do? I just use that as an example of there are things that come to our mindset, to our work, that positively change and can be a sea change. Have you experienced things like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's also a cultural aspect of things
Mm,
in the institution as a whole. But to speak to your point about being a fairly new leader in this particular role, I've been at the college for 7 years, so I've had the ability to
mm,
kind of see in other aspects of things. I've worked in several arms of the college and in different
mm,
positions. So I have a kind of unique perspective of just the different pockets of places that
mm,
we service our students and our employees and how things operate a bit. And so as a
mm,
new leader, I'm able to bring that into this Center for Teaching and Learning as a whole. And I am one that loves to repurpose and reimagine.
mm,
One thing I do know that COVID has taught us is that there are no ceilings, and that we need to recognize that and be able to don't put guardrails on the potential. Rick said, take risk. I'm all about, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. It means we regroup, we come back to the table, we figure out where the kinks were. Do we abandon it? Okay, fine.
yeah,
Or do we keep moving it forward with other adjustments to it? Having a new
mm,
director on my team as well, just trying to move where the gaps were in particular areas, and making sure that, in my role, that I'm as supportive as I can to be able to maneuver and help the person navigate the structures, and also recognize that there is a culture that exists of just how people look at the way in which the institution has been thriving. Some will
mhm,
want to continue to thrive that way, and some will want to figure out, okay, we're always being innovative and thinking about creative ways, but it has not always been a safe space to be able to take risk or be able to say, this didn't work for me,
mhm,
without either having someone question the motive of, accountability to metrics or things like that. It is about
mm,
those things. Data should be informing the things that we do, but we
mm,
also should be in a space of, where are we? Where do we want to be? How do we support
mhm,
our students? How do we support one another? DEI is a perfect example of that. If
mhm,
you have students or faculty and staff who find no value or feel like they don't belong in the institution, what do you think is happening? They're not focused here. They're thinking of where I can go elsewhere to be able to receive that. So DEI was not a conversation of topic, as you mentioned, 15 years ago, but is the crux at this particular
mhm,
point for individuals like myself, our teams, to be able to be acclimated to exactly what that term means. And I think that sometimes it's used in a positive way by, a lot of spaces that we're in doing the equity work and what that means. But I think there's a lot of groundwork that still needs
mhm.
to be done to be able to help folks dig out exactly what that means. It's not an accusatory type of thing to any one population of people.
Right.
It is a helpful tool that will help us be able to establish the groundwork that will then be ingrained in our culture across the campus, that not only
Mm.
supports ourselves, but our students and the college community as a whole. So I'll get off my soapbox for a second.
No, I like that. And what I'm thinking to myself is how that approach, and just DEIB as an example, is such a positive force. And even though, and Rick, I'm going to come to you in a minute and talk about technology a little bit, because I bet you experienced the same thing. Even though it's positive and is going to be serving students, it will still be resisted. Somebody will take offense to something that said. Those individuals are going to be still positioned sometimes in a leadership role. And Renee, I'm just thinking, like, how do you navigate movement? Or Rick, in your case, how do you navigate movement around things the institution should be doing, but may hit a senior leadership bump? I can't move up anymore because I've got someone resisting. Renee, first?
Yeah, so I think it's understanding the parameters around that. And I know that here as of late with our new president, there aren't things that, if there is creativity and innovation and data to support it behind it, we're not hitting bumps
Mm,
as of
mm,
now in most instances.
mm,
Some people might look at that differently when we start, the budgeting process and looking at initiatives
sure.
and things that will apply to that. But in terms of resistance, I mean, you work within you color within the lines that you have. But, you know, in terms of the resistance, you have to understand what is being resistant. And I think that in the position of a person who's responsible for professional development across the college, it is important for me to make sure that I have my hand on the pulse of what's happening, not only on my campus community college, my college community and the college outward, meaning the community as well, but also what's happening outward. What are those trends that are happening? You know, what are things that should be ingrained in teaching and learning? What are those pedagogical practices? You know, what are those diversity and equity aspects? So when there are barriers or resistance, I have the pleasure of creating educational tools and activities to be able to quell that a little bit, to be able to help people see where this is coming from and maybe see themselves and how they can implement that in their classes or within their work and roles and things like that. But the resistance is going to be there no matter what, but you can only tackle it one person at a time, I think. And so it's going to be incumbent upon that person to seek out the discernment. I can tell you the information, I can give it to you, I can make things available, but if you don't seek it because you've closed your mind to what it is and what it could be, then it begs to differ why you are in the business of educating students in the first place. So I just
well, I love, Renee, that you see yourself, you're a senior leader, but you see yourself ultimately as an educator. You know, your role is to inform, educate, bring people along on this journey in that. That's a really key strategy. You're not just a business operator. You're not just a manager or a director or a VP. You're an educator at heart. And that's how you're going to make these changes. Sometimes, I'm going to guess, the change may not occur until that individual is either removed or selects to remove themselves. That may, or change. They may change. That sometimes happens. Rick, I'm going to shift over to you because we, a technological, I guess, sea change happened here about probably 7-8 years ago. It happened to the nation, and that was around this new innovation called MOOCs, you know, multi-organization. I can't even remember what it stands for anymore. But anyways, MOOCs were the thing, you know, and everybody was sort of chasing this concept. And I was just thinking, as Renee was talking, I was thinking about this example. It's a really interesting example because MOOCs could have forced you to change your mission. It's a technology or a kind of more of a pedagogical approach, but it could have changed the mission, the organization, the characteristics, and so forth. Or you can look at it, position it as a sea change event and not change the features underneath it, and then weigh the two out and say, are we in or are we out? That for us was a really interesting phenomena to work through. We ultimately chose, Penn State did, not to engage in the creation of we experimented some, but we ultimately said it's not our space, it's not where we belong. So I'm wondering, you're on the technological infrastructure piece of it, how do you manage those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, I mean, massive online open online courses. I mean,
Thank you.
I think I don't even know if I got it quite right. I think it's it's a really good example of, one of those inflection points or decision points, because, I think we, a lot of us went through that, where that was the next hottest thing, right? This is going to change education. And I think if we were to probably open up a poll, we could come up with about 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 more of those, examples just like that one that we're going to be the next big thing. How is this going to change what we do? And, in the case of MOOCs, I don't think that, sort of that hype was ever realized, right? So at least I guess my point there is at least in half the cases where something comes up and it's supposed to be the next biggest, best thing that's going to change higher ed, at least in half the cases, it doesn't end up materializing. And that's really the challenge for us as leaders, is sort of being able, as we said earlier, being able to discern what's the difference. How do we make it the investment or the decision on something that's going to have a positive change on our students, our faculty, our staff, our administration, our institution. And how do we pass on those ideas that maybe are, a little bit of, that maybe don't have the value or don't align with our institutions as we think. What complicates that in this day and age, today specifically, are the challenges of funding, right? Again, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The dollars and cents of the operation still kind of dictate how, and if we do things and how successful we can be. I know that there's no organization or anyone from any organizations listening to this today that has the funding to do all the things that they want to do. And, in most cases, that's looked at as a negative thing. But I argue in some cases it's a positive thing, because, there's no technology out there that, is going to let us kind of, buy away our problems, right? We've got to make sure that when we're investing in solutions, that we still are looking at, who we are as an institution, how it's going to make a difference, what we can afford, and then making sure when we roll those solutions out, that we have the proper buy-in across the institution. And then also too, once they're out, that they're supported, right? Because I think there's a lot of organizations out there, probably some of ours included, where we've made investments in shelfware, we've purchased something that we thought was going to be a game changer, and it ended up not being quite what it was. So it's really challenging, because if you make a mistake fiscally in this day and age, as the IT folks among us know, it could be a backbreaker. And that sort of making sure that you do your diligence, again, surround yourself by good, smart people that understand the mission and value of the institution, but at the same time can help you make those decisions, those investments in the right things. That'll get your institution on the track that it wants to be. And whether that's the new MOOC or whatever it might be, who knows? But you got to have a process by which you sort of make those decisions, and at the end, you got to be a little bit lucky too. You got to make a decision that sort of that you're committed to, that your institution can that can embrace. But there's a little bit of elemental luck to it too, I think, as we all can kind of understand.
You made a comment earlier, though, that I think is applicable now, and that is not to be afraid to make the change, to do the experimentation, to realize that there's risk in those decisions, right?
Yeah.
Renee, it might be a new strategy that you want to, one of our folks posted up, high flex today is the latest thing. So we see these things, and sometimes they're repurposed ideas from, 10 years ago or whatever. I always got a kick out of the fact that, distance education was discovered in the, the mid 80s. Like, it had actually been happening in many of our institutions for a lot earlier, but that was okay. It got visibility. I guess where I'm going with this is you also have to be willing to recognize and learn from that experience, even if it goes belly up. Okay, what did we do right? What did we do? Do we change anything about how we practice because of what we've learned? Is that part of your approach? Renee, can I go to you?
Absolutely, definitely. And while you were speaking, a situation came to mind for me recently. We had our presidential inauguration festivities that happened in September. And one of our colleagues from Montgomery College, Dr. Paul Miller, came and he was a panelist for us. And I think this sums up the answer to the question, which is as he was answering one of the questions about innovation and futuristic types of things, he mentioned a situation where he was offering a chat about ChatGPT at the University of Maryland or something like that. And this was to a class of journalism students. And so as he was going through the motions with those students, talking about just the social media things that they engage in and just the day and age in which we live in, he asked, how many of you heard of the Jetsons? And he was shocked to not see lots of hands that, anyone could align what he was saying to what is the Jetsons. So we all probably just had that light bulb go off and we're thinking about that cartoon and how futuristic it was back then. But the key point to that is we have a whole generation of students that only know Chat GPT, TikTok, that's the way in which that they're learning, right? So for us to stay behind that curve is not going to benefit us in the long run. When we talk about sea change, that is a huge one because you have students who are able to navigate much better than a lot of us that been in, higher ed for 30, 40, 20, 10 years, time. And the future was being predicted back then with just the way in which innovation was projected. And so we now can connect the dots to that, but we have whole generations of students who all they know is what was in their hand before them. And so we are forced, almost demanded, to change the way in which we look at innovation and how we embrace it, the way in which we embrace it, and how we incorporate that into our teaching and learning practices. So I'll offer that as an answer to your question.
And Renee, I'm thinking in your exploring that topic question just now, you're also saying not to dismiss almost anything. Like we have to at least be aware of it. We have to understand. Now we may elect to not use it, not employ it, whatever, but we must be informed about it.
Absolutely. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, and I just to jump in real quick to that. I mean, earlier, I think Renee again hit the nail right on the head. In one of her previous answers, she mentioned she used the word, reimagine, right? And we talk about that a lot here at AACC. How do we reimagine? How do we rethink? How do we reinvent higher education, right? And I think that when it comes down to, really what we're trying to do, it's those three things. How do we wrap our, how do we make this fun, right? How do we look at this challenge just square in the eye and realize that this is hard, this is scary fiscally, like I just went on for 10 minutes about, it'll keep you up at night, but at the same time, what a fortunate, lucky time for us to be in this, in this world, and in this arena and in this industry. It is a chance to sort of rethink how fundamentally we do. To let the ritual go. Put all those things behind us that have kind of held us back. Reimagine what education can mean to not only to us as we go through our professional development, of our staff, our teams, but most importantly for our students and those students that are coming to our institutions at some point in the future. And then based on what those possibilities are, reinvent that, that product that we offer. And that's scary. And when we talked about, the new stability, kind of that tongue-in-cheek way of saying that, even though we're, now we are in a sea of change, and we do have institutions that are getting more poised to be able to be prepared to make some of these big change. At the same time, it's still too often business as usual. Right. And we're too ingrained in the way, that's we've always done things, and that's the way things have always been. And I think the part of the value of these discussions is, get like-minded people together in a room and talk about some of these things and, and get out of their way. And I think that, allow them to sort of, carry that change to sort of rethink, reimagine, and reinvent higher ed. It's a scary time, but it's an exciting time. It's risky, but at the same time, I think that's what we all signed up for, is to do just this.
Yeah.
Well, I have to tell you, every time I have these conversations with today's leaders, you folks included, I get more and more excited about the potential. But I also come to the realization, and Doug Gray, I'm going to come to you in a minute with the questions. I gotta wake you up there, and not that you were sleeping. I want to draw on your experience as well. What I realize is the wheels of change are constant in my career, from my experience. However, the degree of change mostly is, I'll say, incremental. We make improvements to what we do, sometimes dramatic, sometimes big sea changes. Online learning being utilized the way it was with COVID, it was a sea change. It forced people to deal with something they had heard about, but they had to make a decision and understand that the impact of that. And it's constantly, things are constant. And I want to ask in a bit, Renee, I'm going to prep you on this one. I want to ask you about how do you separate the noise and the confusion around all of the things you hear. But before I do that, let me go to my friend Doug. Doug, you've been in higher ed a long time. You've served in senior leadership roles. How did you manage this large event sea change in your career?
A lot of it has to do with recognizing the issues that happen across the institution. Every change is not good for everybody. I'll go way back, or what seems to be way back. My institution made a change from Apple computers to Microsoft-based computers, and we had to do an entire new retraining of everybody at the institution to make that happen. It wasn't good for everybody. There were people that resented it. There were people that said that oh, I can never work with this computer. I'm gonna wait till I retire or whatever. The thing is, you got to get there are change leaders across your institution. You've got to get them involved in order to make it happen. And you've got to find the things that sell the change to the masses of the institution.
Interesting. Yeah. So you're introduced a strategy right there. You said you have to know who the change leaders are in your various organizations with your institution, because when Renee was speaking earlier about, influencing and educating up, that's who. She talked about the how, you're talking about the who. So that's a good observation. Thank you. Renee, I'll go back then to the point about the noise in the system, that you get this fire hose of information sometimes it can overwhelm you. And then you get, senior leaders perhaps getting very excited about things, wanting to push new modalities or new ideas or anything that haven't been properly vetted. How do you personally go through the process of figuring out what is the next best move?
It is taking that risk. I mean, I think that's what it's ultimately about. I mean, there are opportunities when you do that will create other opportunities that you might not have even thought about. And I think for this conversation too, we talk about the sea change always from the top down, but it doesn't always end up that way. It needs to happen from, I don't want to say bottom, that's not the word I'm looking for, but from our other levels that are below senior leadership and up sometimes, because, those are the folks that are boots on the ground, right? Those are the folks that are in front of our students. Those are the employees that have to, whether it's facilities or whatever the case may be, that sea change needs to happen sometimes from that particular area, because culture is ingrained and inherent in all those types of positions and roles. So figuring out the noise from, the overwhelming, I don't think that there's when you get into a certain level or role in institutions, sometimes the work is what it is and it can be overwhelming. But what I use as a strategy is my, ability to be able to communicate with folks and be able to, you have to delegate. It's not always on Renee's shoulder. Renee has a team. We do this together. It is a we. So any movement we make is a progress for us, and our success is, what I'm responsible for, but also the success of the team. My team is a very talented group of people, very capable group of people, and being able to offer that and allow them to flourish by doing the things that they know what to do with my guidance and with my support is helpful. So when it comes to the top and there is a lot of noise versus signals or whatever the case may be, filtering that is always going to be about, okay, this is what we're discussing right now. What are your thoughts around this? Being engaged in the conversation, being able to strategically think through whether or not it's a good decision for all, as Doug said, but being able to think through what works best and how can we, come up with this together to see if this makes any progress or movement for us as a team and how it impacts the institution as a whole. At the center of everything we do is our students, right? And so that is the most important piece that we should be thinking about. And so there should not be any bounds. We should be taking leaps and doing all types of things that we need to do to be able to do that. So pushing away the noise sometimes is difficult, but that is the role of a person in a leadership role. It's our responsibility to sort of kind of shield our teams from that messiness sometimes and make some sense of what doesn't make sense, and allow the opportunity for us to then push back sometimes and say, well, maybe not. Well, okay. Well, no. So not being afraid to say, no, I don't think that's a great idea and this won't work because, but not just, I don't like it. I'm just going to be this person all day long. That kind of person, you get nowhere with that. But when you are coming to the table with ideas and solutions, my thing is, if you're coming with an idea or something or a problem, come with the solution as well, because that's what we need to be able to move things forward. So.
But I love the idea of your expressing of engaging your foundation team. So you're not bearing the burden of this decision making of leading this forward. You're engaging them to help inform, educate, and vet all of the things that are necessary to move it forward. Thank you. That's terrific. Rick, how about you? How do you the noise and signal issue? Any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, decision making, in information security, we talk about cybersecurity being a team sport, right? You need to, surround yourself with people that get it, that understand it, that can think, in both a symmetric and asymmetric way to be able to understand, what those bad actors are doing in our space, right? And it is a process where it takes a team of people, and I would even argue, that, really all of higher ed is this sort of same concept, right? We're, going back to what I was talking about earlier, culture, people, skill, trust, empathy, skill in people, right? It still makes the most difference. It's still the differentiator for us. And being, like Renee, I'm blessed to be a part of an outstanding team, and really not even just at AACC, but other institutions I've been a part of. I've had the opportunity to, have a foot in both sides of the house. I was, associate vice president of academic affairs for a while, but I also spent, time as a senior leader in IT. And as an instructional designer by trade, I've had a chance to really be surrounded by creative, innovative people that are always, pushing the envelope. And to me, that's what's been really the most fulfilling part of my career is really not those decisions we made, because I don't want to sit here and tell you that we pulled the arm on the slot machine and
right,
hit the jackpot
every single time, right? Yeah.
not my percentage probably wouldn't get me invited back, but we'll leave that aside for now. But it is, but being able to be a part of a team where you can look each other in the eye and trust each other and understand that they have empathy for our students, and as Renee said, put our students at the center sort of everything we do. That's really why we're here, and that process, to be honest, gets us in a more of a successful position more often than not. And that's what it is. It's about teams, it's about organizations, it's about coming together. You said earlier too, the bumps that we face, right? Every organization I've been a part of, from leadership on down, we've run into bumps from time to time. And being able to have a healthy organization that can talk through those items, to challenge each other, to discuss things, at the end, to be framed by what's best for the student. It really, it really is the pleasure of being in higher ed, is that we have that opportunity around us, and that we can make an impact on those lives.
I love that you both speak so fondly and confidently about your teams, and I'm going to guess that everybody on this call has that same mentality. What a terrific resource to draw from in this decision-making process in managing these large sea changes. Renee, I'm going to shift the line of questioning a little bit, if you will, discussion to the issue of politics. And when we were in our prep call, we talked about this, you know, the impact of the political environment and the cultural environment within our institutions can't go unaddressed. It's a part of how things function. And Renee, I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit about how you've seen politics and or culture positively or perhaps negatively helping to weather some of these large sea changes.
Well, definitely, I'll start with positive because it's easy to rattle off a bunch of negatives. So I'll say that. But positively, I think with the inclusion of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, how that is taking shape across colleges, having dedicated folks that are just not playing in the field, but really understand the emotional toll that this work can take on institutions and the people that work for them. But we all know that the political landscape is seeking to remove those types of psychological safety aspects of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, which I think, in my opinion, is a direct result of the lack of understanding of the impact that those letters and what they stand for mean to people. More or less institutions as well, how they support our students and how they see themselves in institutions that they are attending, that they are paying money to attend, right? We all know that, you know, students thrive when they have a model or something that they feel they belong to, thus the community of practice. Thus those types of activities exist for students, the cohort model, you know, when you're going along with something where you're together and you can, you know, express that. And I think oftentimes the political aspects bleeds into the cultural aspects of things a bit. Institutionals have their culture. We have our personalities per se of, you know, exactly the people that make it up and how we, you know, appear outward in that ecosystem of the politics. But I think that decisions that are being made outward, unless they are law, you know, we have the ability to be able to A, educate, B, be able to figure out where we fit in with these practical changes that make sense, you know, bring the institution along incrementally together and not have siloed points of people that have pockets of information of, I believe this, I want to do this, and then other areas, it's a whole different experience for students or employees, et cetera. So politically, you know, it's just, especially around, you know, just higher ed in general, in terms of the cost of it. That's political, you know, within itself. Using community colleges as a pathway to lower debt and things like that, but it's not always publicized that way. We have a stigma, I think, from high schools when students are going through them, whether or not we are the next stop. Although dual enrollment is one of our highest populations of students that we actually service, right? But if a student is coming to us for like open campus or something like that, they have the opportunity to go to four-year institutions, but that information about the value of a community college education is politicized a bit in terms of what is the more acceptable versus what is the most cost-effective and same value. So I think those things play into the political aspects, which again bleeds into just the culture, because we all are people working for an institution. We have our beliefs systems, we have our thought process, we have our, you know, things that we have been brought up to believe and things like that, that definitely bleeds into what we do on a day-to-day. And so that's something to be careful and cognizant of as we think about the political ramifications versus the cultural ones as well.
Renee, you mentioned something that I want to draw in another friend of mine on the program here who I presented with, Jessica Young. Jessica, so nice to see you. A number of years ago, Jessica and I did a session at MOLLI that looked at this sphere of influence. And you said something that triggered that thought, and I want to ask Jessica for her reflections on this as well. As a senior leader in this higher education ecosystem, how do you sort of figure out where your sphere is, what your limits are? And do you sometimes need to bump against those to push things along? There may be, a grade level up is often the term used. Jessica, if I can go to you with that one first, and I'll come back to my panelists, but I just wanted to say hi to you and see what your reflections might be.
Larry, it's so great to see you. Thank you so much. That's a really interesting question, being new in my role as well, working with Dr. Davis. Navigating those channels is always a bit challenging in the beginning, but looking at the circles. So we look at our inner circle, those closest to us, we expand out to our institution, and then we expand out to our greater, whether it's Maryland or national, looking at how we can maximize our input at our local institutions by drawing from those external circles. One of my mentors, Jürgen Hilke, he always reminded me that you have to lead up. So our leaders have great vision, but they often don't have the nitty-gritty details of our day-to-day work. So being able to help at a high level explain the importance and how it's going to benefit across the board, not just our individual departments, but being able to make those incremental changes by leading upward.
Yeah. Renee, my guess is that you do that. I have a sense that you do that well in your institution, that you're aware of.
Jessica. Do I do that, Jessica?
I hope I didn't put anyone on the spot here, but I think what you mentioned earlier, Renee, was about educating up, and Doug brought in the idea of maybe not even just to your immediate senior reporting line, but maybe to other individuals within the institution who have influence.
Yeah, I think it's important, exactly what Jessica said, she hit the nail on the head, that it is important that, not just to see ourselves in our work, because of the work that we do across the college, definitely touches on each and every aspect of what's going on around us. And so it's important to be able to see the tie-in, because then you see the bigger vision about, you can see the mission in action when you are collaborative with other areas across the college, as we should be, because the work is likely, we are student support facing, right? We have our student affairs office who do the same type of work. So this work that we do definitely impacts that. And so we want to make sure that the whole picture is seen. There may be a block or two missing, but we can work with that. But just being able to understand exactly what the goal is and how we expect to move forward, it is important to be able to understand that from a higher lens or sphere of influence across the college.
Yeah, thank you. Rick, I'm going to come back to you on this, because you're advancing, the infrastructure of the institution, oftentimes the technological dimension. How do politics and culture influence that kind of work?
Significantly, right? It comes back to what I was talking about earlier, funding is the bottom line that sort of makes the process of the operation go around. And, that is a lot of politics in general are tied to funding. So, there is sort of a kind of a dance to be done. Sometimes you might think IT operations are just the ones and zeros, or the people that we put, in closets and kind of forget about. But, really, we're becoming more foundational to the operation than ever before. Actually not becoming, we have become more foundational to the operation. Just as important as any other aspect of things. It's sort of kind of the technology advancements and what solutions you deploy and how well they work and how well they meet the needs of your students, your faculty and staff they really define the trajectory of the organization. So it's really critically important. To the last point that we were kind of discussing, I've been fortunate here at the institution to work with, two great deans of distance education. Colleen Eisenbeiser, I think many of you know, who just recently retired, and our new dean of distance education, Dr. Megan Myers. they both have really interesting perspectives. And one of the things that Megan says all the time is she says that, clarity is kindness. And when helping to structure your decision-making process through organizations, being clear with people kind of on the roles of who they are, what's expected of them, holding them accountable to that, but also making sure that organizationally we're fair and clear to who they are and what they do. And we tend to break our organization down into 3 levels: the strategic, the operational, and tactical. And, Jessica made such a great point, kind of about, leading up or managing up. We really welcome that and encourage that and expect that of our team at all 3 layers, to make sure that they share their understanding and perspective on the organization with those around them, with those above them, at all 3 layers, whether it's a skip level situation or whatever it might be. Making sure that I, as a part of the strategic layer, understand the challenges faced by the tactical layer, help us to sort of make decisions, around all the things that we talked about today. What do we spend our money on? What technology do we deploy? How do we, how do we ultimately make it successful? So I don't know that that really, affects politics too much, but this day and age, I try to keep my nose maybe out of that. So, or maybe better yet, the way to put it is, in a classic political situation, you asked me a question, I answered another one that I wanted to, which maybe the best political move of all. So, yeah.
You're a good leader. Hey, this is very interesting, and I'm just wondering about something we didn't prep on, frankly, and that was the role of analytics, of data in managing these sea changes. How do you draw on? We're talking about political decision making or cultural decision making. How do you view? I'm going to go back to Renee here for this to start us off on this one. But how do you use data that as an influencer?
Data is the essential component needed to make decisions. I mean, point, period. Right? I know that historically, sometimes in my institution, I'll put us out there a bit, there has not been the availability of accurate data that for the metrics that we need to be able to look at, how our students are doing and things like that. That has shifted. We have implemented dashboards that give us, at the touch of your hand, you can go and look and pull the data that you need. I think that we're getting much better with that. I think that we have transitioned to the early stages of being a data informed, using data to inform the decisions that occur within the college. I do not think that was commonplace before. I do think that people operated a lot in the past on what they believed might work, and there was no data to support it. I do think that there was never an opportunity, or a lack of opportunity, I will say, that we didn't collect the data. It is just that it fell in whatever pit the next moment, that we never moved forward from using that as an opportunity to kind of assess where we were.
So it sounds to me like this is really a strategic tactic, if you will, for helping to weather through these storms. And Rick, you're in the IT area. I would guess the same is going to hold for you.
Yeah, I mean, we aspire to be a data-driven organization. We want to be a group that's known for managing with facts. These are all things that we sort of these are the standards that we hold ourselves to. At the same time, it's really hard because data integrity is such a if you're making decisions based on clean, smart data, it can provide immense insights, and I think we all get that. But it's sometimes when you question the data, it just makes the situation murkier. It actually makes the decision-making process harder. The impact of technology on being able to refine and understand and pull the data has immense implications on how we do business. But this part of it too is making sure that if we want to be managed with facts, and we want to be organizations that make decisions based on data, we have to sort of have, coming back to those concepts I said earlier, that ability to trust, right? Trust the people that are pulling the numbers, trust the people that are compiling the numbers, trust the conversations that we have, which can be a hard thing for administration sometimes in higher ed. to embrace, and I'm not speaking for my institution personally, but I think that across our careers, we've run into people that, that want to manage with their gut, and there's been careers developed around people that have done that. And I'm not here to say that that's right or wrong, or that I don't even engage in that myself. But in this day and age, it's if you don't have, clean sources of data that are trusted, it can really it can make them, the water's kind of murky. And getting from where we have organizations that, manage based on that gut feel to managing based on data is a transition I think that, most of us are probably right in the midst of.
Yeah. And the data, and Doug and Wendy and Julie and other leaders in MOLLI have talked about this for a long time. Maybe that's a separate webinar at some point about how do you trust the data? How do you know what the underlying assumptions are as it's drawn and so forth? That's an interesting dimension of this. I think it certainly informs and drives, and in some cases could solidify or clarify some of these decision points once we have that information, but it's not without its issues, right? So two things I want to do. I want to shift a little bit of the conversation to some positive things. I'd like to hear from Rick and Renee both, and anyone else, by the way, on the call, about some positives that have come out of the sea changes that you've experienced, some things that maybe have excited you or have changed the way we do things in a positive. I don't want to paint these big sea changes as always as like, shoot, even COVID, as much as we hate to say the word, there were some positive outcomes of that, things that we learned. So let me start with that. And Renee, maybe I'll kick it off with you first.
Absolutely. So you mentioned COVID. I mean, the positive changes that I see from that, given the circumstances, is the ability, as I said earlier, to reimagine, how we do things. We have that ability, whereas we may not have been thinking about that in the past. For me, I'm optimistic in my institution, even with the changes that we talked about that might have seemed a little bit negative, but they weren't meant to be. I think that we are all moving together and forward with progress together. And so I'm very optimistic at what I'm able to engage in, especially in my new role, and just seeing the vision and how that can be communicated in all realms of the college. I think for higher education as a whole, especially for us, I'm definitely excited about just the new possibilities of the varied dominant populations of students that we get to engage, to include our adult student populations, with looking at badging, looking at just innovative ways of micro-credentialing and things like that, making short-term paths for folks who may not be interested in 2- and 4-year degrees, but trying to get into their careers. I'm excited to be able to have these types of conversations and to be able to be engaged. Someone, I think it was Rick, mentioned, one of his colleagues said, clear as kind. We engaged in our cabinet here in the reading of Brene Brown, who she specifically coined that phrase. And we use those strategies to be able to create tactical movements about how we operate with our team. Having I'm going on and on, but having an amazing provost who has engaged us so much with just a different way of looking at things. And that just transitions into just how our whole interaction across the campus, being able to support the community, being able to support the campus as a whole in the education process, because I am an educator at heart first before I'm an administrator. So I'll stop there.
But so Renee, you just talked through, I think, a terrific strategy. And that is your senior leadership has to set the table, right, for this change to occur, to be open to it, that you've got a provost who's energized and is not creating stagnation. He or she, I'm not sure, is creating an environment where you can consider change and consider. That's a really exciting perspective, because it presents opportunities.
Absolutely.
So senior leadership as the ones kind of creating the environment for that to foster and to flourish. Rick, how about you?
Yeah, I got a chance. Marjorie was there at our academic convocation at the start of the semester. I got a chance to be a part of a panel discussion like this with my fellow vice presidents, and they are they're amazing. They're amazing women. They're amazing leaders. They're smart. They're challenging. And we had a conversation about this very same question. And so, where do we go now? That we're emerging from this pandemic and, COVID, even though in many ways we're kind of still one foot in both worlds, kind of where we go. And my comment was this, is I think the only mistake that we could make coming out of this is that if we just try to strive too much to go back to the way things were, right? Renee said it again, we reimagine, and I added to rethink and reinvent education. And really, I think that's where we are. And, the other part of it too is I personally, for me, it's the positive to come out of it is perspective, right? And that may not really relate as much to specifically my job or the work that I do, but the perspective and the importance of what matters to me. And I think what matters to all of us, family, friends, connection, those type of things that we don't normally, that I like to say personally that maybe I've taken for granted in the past, and being able to use the pandemic as a chance to sort of understand what's important to me, and then also to be able to make that connection with our students, our faculty, staff, to hear from them that that's something that many of us have in common, that we have that sort of similarity, and that we don't want to just go back to, again, like I said before, just the way things always were. Let's use that perspective to make, the work that we do, whether it be through technology, distance education, academic administration, instruction in the classroom, let's use that as a fulcrum for change. And that's one of the things that I think is can be a silver lining in a gray cloud.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you. So as we're nearing our conversation, I just wanted to see if there were any comments. Shinta, Mike, I know a lot of you on the call. Any further input from your perspective? You're also many of you on the call are in leadership roles, and I'm curious if you've had any reflections you'd like to share.
I can certainly add. Thank you so much, Larry, for that. I wanted to, first of all, I appreciate, it was Renee and then Rick, you had also added to this, the phrase data-informed approach. So I really appreciate the word informed as part of the workings of higher ed. And data democratization is important, as you both alluded to. But I have a thought and a question. So much of what we've been discussing here is related to how our navigation through sea change impacts us and our students right here, right now. But I'm wondering, how you think this might impact our students, especially when they enter the labor market and leave our institutions. So sort of like thinking forward a little bit into the future.
So for me, I think
Rick, you want to?
Oh,
go ahead, Renee. Sorry, go ahead, Renee.
Go ahead, Renee. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think from my perspective, in terms of your question, it is important for us with all of the sea change that's happening here. And as we're recognizing that there is still work to be done, there are people that are doing the work regardless of those changes. We need to make sure that it's ingrained in our processes as we move our students through not only our classes and courses with our faculty, but the curriculum is informed enough that it will help them be better stewards or professionals in the workforce. So that's how I would look at that.
Yeah, good. So you're talking about building it into the way we instruct, the way we communicate.
Those are called soft skills that a lot of students don't often have when they go into the workforce. And I don't think that we build those in enough in certain classes or courses to be able to teach that, because sometimes you have to teach that for folks to understand what it is or what does it mean to be a professional and how you are supposed to model yourself in the workplace.
Very good. Thanks, Renee.
Yeah,
Rick?
And I think I think it's a really great question, and I think it's a considerable challenge that's on the horizon. We talked a little bit in our prep a little bit about AI and the impact that it's going to have on the industry, and I think that maybe it would be a great topic for one of these discussions in the future, really to dive deep and unpack that and the impact it's going to have on teaching and learning and how we do business and all sorts of different ways. But specifically in relation to careers in the future, I do think that sooner than later, AI is going to have a significant impact on the careers that our students are pursuing. I would even argue that AI is, listen, it's not a very controversial point. It's going to have an impact on our careers, right? Regardless of what stage we're in, there is going to be transition that's driven by, artificial intelligence some way or the other, right? Not only in how we teach, but how we learn and how we leverage these technologies. And in fact, into the jobs that we do, whether it be medicine or law or technology or, in the military or whatever it might be, it is going to have such a significant impact on it. And I know that many of you probably recently watched 60 Minutes and saw some of these other shows and programs that were talking about, all the doom and gloom of AI. I don't always share all of that concern. I think that there is a lot more positive than negative. Maybe we'll get into that at another point. But Shinta, to your point, I do think that we're going to have to sit down very soon as institutions and say, we are training people for tracks of jobs that in 5 years, 10 years, certainly will not be there. And I'll use this example and then I'll turn it back over to Larry, is that, there was a time where, we all remember the old, the switchboard operators, right? Where, somebody would sit and they would connect, KLN 555 to whatever it was across the telephone network at the time. As soon as technology came in, those jobs went away immediately. Now that's just one example, but AI has the ability across many fields to sort of make a lot of the ways in which we work not necessarily obsolete, but trending toward that. So I do think that it's important as educators, technologists and leaders, we start to look and identify how that change is going to affect the careers that our students are going to, and then start to be able to guide them in paths so that they understand and can make their own decisions about what careers they want. But, for us to be able to say, hey, just study law and be a lawyer for the future, which still, by the way, I'm not here to say isn't going to be a viable career in the future, but it was one of the career lanes where in the past you could make, large income, successful, all of these things, the prestige that goes along with it, that may be a career that's significantly impacted by this in the future. And I think we need to go eyes wide open into this as to help our students sort of understand it.
All right. Well, that was a pretty wide encompassing trip. Thank you, Shinta, for that question, and Renee and Rick for your responses. It maybe cues up a topic for a MOLLI webinar in the future to begin exploring. I don't think it's a once and done thing. Julie and I have talked about this and such. And so, Marjorie, in your role with MOLLI, maybe that's something to jot down. I'm sure you already have it on your notepad. Our time is up. I'd love to draw in so many more of you around the screen today. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll look forward to future discussions. Rick and Renee, you two are awesome. Thank you so much for your reflections and sharing your expertise with us. And Marjorie, maybe I'll turn it over to you to sign us off.
Sure. I'm going to pop up a slide. If you need to take a picture or a screenshot of it, you can do that for your attendance. And then as well, look for future emails and the MOLLI website for information about our upcoming webinars. We have 3 more this fall. So thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Take care, all. Bye-bye.